L. Brooks Patterson is gone. This morning, the life and influence of a polarizing political titan. And a Republican congressman from Michigan says he's had enough. The political bickering drives Paul Mitchell out of the game. He's here to talk about it. Today is Sunday, August 4th, 2019, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. You know, for a few months, I assumed our topic this morning was fairly set in stone. With the Democratic debates postmarked Detroit, surely we would need to spend our time drilling down on two, as it turned out, pretty fascinating nights at the Fox Theater. Well, a couple of things happened along the way. First, Republican Paul Mitchell announced that he will do something quite rare. He is giving up a secure seat in Congress. Why? Because he just can't stand the political climate that has Americans so divided and ultimately means very little of substance can get done. And we've got a conversation with Paul Mitchell coming up a little later on this morning. Then, while it was hardly a surprise, L. Brooks Patterson died yesterday morning. You know, it was just February when we learned that he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and as it so often does, that cancer won out in frighteningly quick fashion. If you spent any time on Twitter yesterday, you understand how complicated it is to look at the life and times of L. Brooks Patterson. Even as so many applauded his sterling record and commitment to his beloved Oakland County, others decried villainy that commitment came at the expense of Detroit. Make no mistake, he was one of the most consequential politicians in the history of Southeast Michigan. The county's AAA credit rating and fully funded pension system and scandal-free reputation didn't just happen. This morning, the legacy of L. Brooks Patterson on Flashpoint. My conversation with Congressman Paul Mitchell is coming up in just a little bit, but we're going to start with the passing of L. Brooks Patterson. If you spent any time yesterday on social media, you would think that two different people were being remembered. It is hard to believe that his fans and detractors were talking about the same person. Let's talk about it. I'm joined this morning by Stephen Henderson of Detroit Today at WDET. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is here, who knew Brooks for many, many years, as did Macomb County Executive Mark Hackel and the editorial page editor from the Detroit News, Nolan Finley. And Nolan, let me start with you. You wrote in your piece that you either loved Brooks or hated him. Right. You loved him.
I did.
But the Metro Times had a piece out within 5 hours of his passing, I think, yesterday, that said, rest in peace, L. Brooks Patterson, a racist.
Well, I don't think Brooks was a racist. I think Brooks was elected by the people of Oakland County to work for the people of Oakland County. And I've heard him say many times that if he could help Detroit without hurting Oakland County, he would. If he could help Detroit and keep Oakland County neutral, he would, but he wasn't going to help Detroit at the expense of Oakland County. That wasn't his job. That was not what he was hired to do. And there were a few of these initiatives he opposed. I think he ended up right on. And I think other suburban leaders like Mark Hackel here had joined him on, including the transportation package that he and Mark derailed. I think he was, as you said, a complicated person, but I think he was probably the best executive that Michigan's ever seen, and perhaps one of the best in the nation. I've always said that if he could control his tongue, he would have been governor, perhaps more. But if he could control his tongue, he wouldn't have been Brooks.
It's exactly right, Mark. He really could not keep himself. If there was an opening for somebody compared him yesterday to Don Rickles, he had that razor sharp wit, and it sometimes got him in a lot of trouble.
It did. There's no question about it. Again, you know, everybody has a different style, and you can go ahead and try to, I guess, if you will, define somebody if you would like. But if I had a one-word definition of Brooks Patterson, I think I would simply say, you know, he was authentic. He was who he was. And unfortunately, that's missing with a lot of public officials today. They attempt to be who they think people want them to be to get elected or to get to that next office. Brooks wasn't like that. You accepted him or you didn't, and he just moved forward. You know, and as just was mentioned here, let's face it, I mean, this county, Oakland County, is recognized nationally as one of the most well-run counties in the entire country. So that says a lot. You know, like a character, not like a character, I'll tell you what, I truly enjoyed him because I trusted him. And that's something that's important to me with any relationship, but in particular in politics. I trusted having a conversation with him where we were going and how the issues were going to be resolved.
Warren Evans, your counterpart in Wayne County, said the same thing, that you always knew exactly where you stood with him. Stephen, Brian Dickerson wrote this morning, he could be startlingly callous in public, but almost no one who knew him disliked him personally. I think you know him well, too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think this idea of two different people that you were working with earlier is really important here. I mean, anyone who knew Brooks, I think, understood more about where he came from and what he did. But you can't sort of excuse, I think, the public persona and the public positions that he took, the racist things that he said, the racist things that he did. I mean, remember, this is someone who comes to public prominence in this community in 1971, fighting against busing. People who are bombing buses in Pontiac, he's on their side.
No, not the bomb. No, I don't think that's
I'm sorry.
he
right
was not on the side of the bombers.
Right. But he was on the side of the people who did not want integration in Pontiac. Over time, he becomes, the foil for the idea of Detroit as an African-American-led city, as a majority African-American city. And I think if you think about the people that were hurt most, I think, by the things that Brooks said and did, think of the African-Americans who live in Oakland County. The hundreds of and thousands of blacks who moved to that county only to hear their leader say terrible things about the city that they came from, say hurtful things about African Americans.
And yet they were moving to Oakland County because of its attractiveness.
And voting for Brooks when they got there.
And often voting for him. And that gets to that complication. I mean, no one is one thing. People are very complicated. He was one of the most complicated people I knew, but I don't think you can dismiss the negative side of the things that he did.
Debbie, you politically, obviously, you had many differences with him over the years, and yet I think you also loved him.
I did love him. He was a good friend. We could scream at each other. You were all witnesses to the two of us wanting to kill each other. But he also said to me, I mean, one of the most, right after I got elected, he was like, okay, Debbie, you got to chill a little. Let's smile. Let's not be so intense. And the next week, he almost decapitated my head. And he goes, okay, listen to me. Don't do as I say. But he, I agree with things that Steve said. But we don't have enough of the authenticity, period. And I don't agree with him. I didn't agree with him on a lot of things, but you always knew where he stood, and he would call something as needed to be said. Too many people are afraid to have real conversations, and that's a problem. And I'm not defending what he said, but Brooks would, and he did it with humor. I think all of us have to, the way that he would use humor was effective at sometimes allowing conversations to be happening. You might want to kill him. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I wanted to kill him. But you were right about that heart. Brooks Patterson cared about people. People have no idea how much he did for someone that needed a helping hand. Sick kids. I can't tell you how many times Brooks called me and said, I need help. Can you help this person or that person? He had a big heart. Wasn't perfect, but he was our friend.
There was this, he always said, as you said, as long as it was neutral, if it was just neutral for Oakland County. But can we get around the fact that I think you'd have to say that he, along with maybe Mark, were a big part of why we don't have a mass transit plan in Southeast Michigan. And that would have served the region and not just.
I would say, again, we can get into this debate again, but I would disagree. We have regional transit. It's just that nobody has fully accepted it in Wayne County and or Oakland County. And my issue is, there's got to be this tax equity. You can't just say, okay, Macomb's paying in totality $1 million, and now we're going to add another $1.5 million, where there are going to be communities in Oakland and or Wayne County that are going to be paying $1.5 million. So there has to be tax equity. This conversation is so long and drawn out, and there's so many issues to it.
It is complex.
Very complex. And so to just identify that and say, okay, well, Mark Hackle doesn't support Detroit because he's not supportive of that yet, supporting the DIA, supporting what was going on with the Zoological Authority, supporting COBO. I mean, there are many things, even the Great Lakes Water Authority. So just because something didn't work, but there is many reasons why. It's not because we don't agree that Detroit needs to be supported and there needs to be help from the suburbs for the comeback. That I find troubling, when people want to define you based upon one particular vote or an issue. And so I agreed with him that there needs to be, at least a level playing field, specifically with taxing, equity, and governance structure when it comes to regional transit. More than happy to be supportive of it, but it's got to work out for all fairly.
Getting back, though, to his, you said before we started that he really, at heart, wanted to be a stand-up comedian, I think. His turn of a phrase often got national attention, which wasn't always a great reflection on Detroit.
No, but again, that's who Brooks was. I mean, he said what popped in his head and then thought about it later. You know, he made me cringe a lot of times, and I thought the world of him. But I do know.
And that's
that,
from a guy who's gotten, you've gotten in trouble for
I've been there
things you've
myself
said
once
plenty
in a
of
while,
times.
but who cares, right?
Authentic.
You think about what Brooks did when the city was struggling financially. Lent Bob Dado, probably one of the best municipal finance guys in the country, lent him for months to come in and straighten it out. He helped put together that Cobo deal that has turned around that center and lifted it out of just a corrupt, rotten mess and made it an asset for the entire region. He was instrumental in putting together the water authority. Both you and he, Mark, worked on that. There were a number of times, more times Brooks engaged than he didn't engage.
And you know, to your point, you said something that's important. His staff was incredible. The people he surrounded himself with really understood the business.
Yeah,
he didn't get a bunch of political appointees that he brought in. There were people that really understood the business and what they were doing, and that was helpful to me.
And as I kind of pointed out at the beginning, sandwiched between two places that have had a fair amount of problems with corruption, both in your county and Wayne County, there really was never a scent of any of that kind of thing going on in Oakland County. But this is, I've thought since it was announced that he was ill, Stephen, that this was going to be one of the most complicated eulogies and lives to consider that I can imagine.
Yeah, well, it's hard. I mean, and again, people are not one-dimensional. I don't think you can talk about any of these things without talking about the others. Unfortunately, most people in this region didn't know Brooks personally. They only knew him through his public persona and the policies that he supported. And so I think if you're, for instance, if you're an African American who lives here, there's not an easy way to see him as anything other than someone who supported racist policy and held the city back. But if you knew him, of course, you know that there was a much more nuanced personality behind all of that.
I would tell you, he used to pick me up on St. Patrick's Day in a van. He had all his buddies in there. We'd go to bar after bar after bar in Detroit, the old Miami, Nancy whiskey. People would pour out just to be around Brooks. And those were African Americans.
Some of them
The last word.
You know, I want to add into all of this, he wasn't a rubber stamp. Too many people are afraid to have real conversations right now. And he wasn't afraid to take the arrows, and I might not agree with him, but he wouldn't let people rubber stamp, and in that way, he defended Southeast Michigan.
Thanks so much for the conversation on a pretty complex matter, as I said. A real conversation with Paul Mitchell coming up next. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.